Well, it's November 30th, Saturday 2019, a few days after the Thanksgiving holiday, and I thought I'd take my Admiral 30C15 out of the cabinet to start doing some work on it. And here's the television, pretty dusty and dirty. Power supply and audio amplifier down there. Here's something interesting. The 5U4 was missing, and the socket's pretty dusty, so I would say that somebody took that rectifier off there a long time ago. I don't know what work they tried to do on it, but what I'm doing right now is I'm testing the CRT again. I did test it when I picked it up from the seller, and I thought it tested pretty close to the low line of good. But now that I'm testing it, I've left it cook for some time. The cutoff is right below the good, the low end of the good line, and the emissions. Well, the emissions are pretty poor. It's a 12 LP4 CRT. Now I know that a brightener will solve this problem. And I don't mind using a brightener on it because I don't use a set like this to watch television on. I may have it on for a half hour or 45 minutes or a short time to demonstrate it to somebody, but the set's not on very often, so a brightener in this case, until they start rebuilding picture tubes again, which I don't know if they'll ever rebuild any 12 LP4s, but if I move the filament voltage up to the next notch, I can bring it into the good. So I know that it will at least produce a picture good enough to demonstrate it. I didn't expect the picture tube to be too good. It's hard to find. It's funny because the two sets that I have, they have metal CRTs in them. Those tubes checked out very good. This one must have had high hours on it. So I'll be testing all the vacuum tubes. I'll do that off camera, and then we'll take a look underneath the set and see what I've got to work with. So where I'm ending up on this thing today, I've tested all of the tubes that were in the power supply and audio amplifier, and all the tubes in the television, and I actually had to replace 4 tubes in there. One had a broken pin, and there were maybe it was only 3. There were 2 6AU6s that had high grid leak readings. They may or may not have worked, but I put ones in that didn't have that. I have a lot of spare tubes. So I've checked all the tubes. I checked this big power resistor. Bob Anderson, on his restorations of his Admirals, he said that almost every one of his that was open. Actually on this one it's not. It's not open at all. So maybe I'll luck out on that one. But the problem is a super weak CRT. How is that going to work out? So what I think I'm going to do in the next time I get to this, I'm going to slowly power it up. I'm going to replace the 2 rectifiers with solid state ones. I have these right here, and the reason I'll do that is because I'm going to bring the power up very slowly, measuring the B+, and I want to see if any of these electrolytics, the cans in the set and on here, heat up at all, if they'll reform, if they'll work. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Then once I establish that I can power it up to full power, I'll put the rectifier tubes back in, and I'll see if I could get the TV working without shotgunning all the capacitors in it. I'll see what I could do with it just to see if I can get any kind of an image on the screen. If I can't get an image on the screen, I'm not going to take a lot of time and spend a lot of money on capacitors and other parts and not be able to actually see an image on the screen. So until I find a 12 LP4 tube, I guess this will just have to be in my house as a display piece. But I'm going to try to see if I can repair it without shotgunning it. I'll see how I do. So basically at this point, I've tested all the tubes, cleaned some of the dust off the chassis, cleaned up the tubes. I had to replace 3 of the tubes. One of them, the 6J6 here, had a broken pin. It was right at the base of the tube. It was a filament pin. So if that pin was barely touching in there, that could have been very intermittent. In any event, the flyback doesn't look cooked. The high voltage power supply fuse is intact. All the other tubes tested good. The CRT, however, tested quite weak. Bob Anderson thought that maybe I should try it to, you know, that it may still produce a picture. We'll see. Power supply tubes are okay. The audio tube is a little weak, missing the 5U4, but I'm going to, originally my plans were and I still will do this, is to replace these rectifiers with solid state and just bring the power up very slowly to see if the electrolytics here and the electrolytics on board the TV, that nothing cooks or burns up. I'll be watching the current draw and feeling them to make sure they don't get hot. This resistor is not open. I thought that would be open, but it's not. Fuse is good. So I guess the next step is I'm going to explore the underside of the chassis and see what's there and what's been done, if anything, and see where I'm at with that. With underneath the chassis on both the television and of course the power supply. I'll be looking underneath. So we'll take a look at that. So here's the under part of the chassis. It all looks pretty clean. This capacitor here looks like it cooked a little bit. This appears to be a replacement. I'll have to look that up in the schematic and see what that really is, but it's a replacement of some sort. It looks like a non-polarized capacitor. I'll have to see what that is. These are replacements, these resistors. This resistor on the focusing pot is a replacement, and I checked the focusing pot and the focusing pot is good. So I'm pretty sure that I can ease the power up on this thing without it blowing up. I don't want to go through changing all kinds of capacitors and parts on this thing if the CRT is going to be unusable, if I can't even get an image on it. I just don't see that I would want to spend the time and money on rebuilding this. So if I find out that the CRT just will not give an image of any reasonable kind, I'm just going to put it back together as a display piece at this point, but haven't gotten to that yet. I have to bring the power up. So everything under here shows me that I might be able to bring power up on this without it frying out. But of course I'll be prepared to quickly shut the power off should that happen. And here's the under part of the power supply and audio amplifier chassis. Everything looks original. I don't see any fried parts. Here's one Black Beauty capacitor. I know that those are very prone to leaking. Probably all the wax capacitors in there, many of them are probably problematic, but I'm hoping I can put power on this thing eventually just to evaluate to see if the CRT does anything at all, if I get any light on it at all, because I'm not going to spend too much time on this television if I've got a bad picture tube. I'm all set up to bring power up slowly. I've got my meter set to read B+ off the 5U4 rectifier, but I've got solid state rectifier plugs plugged in both of the rectifiers, because I want to be able to pass DC right away without trying to get the filaments heated up. And I have the cap off the horizontal output tube, just in case I don't want to red plate it if the horizontal oscillator doesn't start up. So basically all I'm going to do at this point, what this power-up test is first of all to see if anything cooks, if I get any smoke from underneath, and to see if the electrolytic cans stay cool or not. There's two on the other side of the TV that I have to check. And I'll be monitoring current instead of voltages. I know that when I get up to my first mark here, I'm around 60 volts. Straight up and down is about 90 volts, and over to the right it'll be at 117 volts. So I'll be doing this very slowly. If I see any signs to see any smoke come out, smell anything burning, or I get high current readings, I'll shut power down. So here I go. I'm going to start raising power. And I'm watching my B+. I'm only at 20 volts in. I always worry that this thing is going to blow up right in my face. We're drawing a little over an amp at this point with only 85 volts B+. Kind of wondering, you know, what's going to happen when I get up to full voltage. About an amp and a quarter. We're only at 45 volts. Bring it up to 60 volts and I'll hold it there for a while. It's 163 B+. I'll just leave it idle at this voltage for a while, see what, if anything, happens. I see my current is starting to drop slowly. That's probably electrolytic capacitors reforming. I'll let this sit at this voltage. I'm watching the current drop. We were almost up to 2 amps, but now we're going less than an amp and a half at 185 B+. The B+ is supposed to be around 300 to 310 volts on the high voltage B+, a little bit lower for the audio section. So current is dropping. This will take time. I'll probably do a lot of this off camera, and if anything blows up, which won't make it into camera, I'll certainly, once I post this video, I will mention what happened and show what happened. So I'll do a lot of this off camera. This is the electrolytic on the 5U4B+ side, and just at 60 volts, that capacitor actually got quite you know, it's not hot, but it is very warm. This one is cold. This one's warm. The the cans that are on the chassis on the television at this point are still cold. So I'm going to leave it sit for a while. I got the power off, obviously, and I'll let that capacitor cool down a little bit, and then I'll bring it back up. I may have to put a replacement capacitor in for this one, because if that cap isn't going to reform to be able to run without blowing up, I'll have to put a capacitor in for that one. Let's just see what happens. Well, that capacitor is sufficiently cooled off. It's just been a few minutes. I'm going to bring the power up to around 60 volts for a little bit again. And then I'm going to shut it down because I've got to go out to my recording studio job. I got to drop an amplifier that I repaired off. So I'll bring the power up slowly again. I believe I was at 180 volts B+. And I am watching current. I see that the current is coming up much slower than it did when I first powered this up. So I won't put the vacuum tube rectifiers in until I'm ready to to test this thing out completely. Like I say, I do have the cap off the horizontal output tube so that if the horizontal oscillator doesn't start, it doesn't burn the tube up. Much lower current now. There's 180 volts. We'll go up to, let's see what I've got for volts in. We'll bring it up to 60. We're over 200 volts now. Current is a little over an amp and it's dropping a little bit. I won't leave it. I'm not going to go over 60 volts in. And when I shut it down, I'll you feel that cap. The other caps are cold. This one is heating up just a little bit, but I do think it's reforming. Okay, so this cap is just barely warm now. Before I leave to do my recording studio gig, I'm going to bring it up to about 60 volts, over 200 volts B+, one more time and let it sit there for a while. Then I'll shut her down. And then maybe this evening I'll do some more on it. Let me bring the voltage up slowly. I don't think I'm up to enough volts to sufficiently light the filaments in the tubes. But you can't do what I'm doing with vacuum tube rectifiers. You have to use the solid state ones to do this. Otherwise, you have to get the voltage up too high for it to pass B+. Now the current is staying quite low now, which is good to see. It really came up pretty high when I first powered it up. I'm at, let me see, I want to bring it just up to about 60 volts in. And 60 volts in gives us 245 volts B+. So I'll let it sit at this for a while and I'll shut it down for the day and resume maybe this evening on this project. So I've let some time go by and this capacitor is room temperature cold. It is, feels cold. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the voltage up to 260 volts B+. I'm watching my current draw, because if anything happens where it starts drawing a lot of current, I'll kill the power instantly. We'll leave it at 265 or thereabouts. There we are, 265. And to get there, I'm feeding it with, well, I'm still at just 65 volts line current. So the B plus is going up and the current draw is going low, which means that the electrolytics are probably forming. So I'm going to watch that, see if anything gets hot. I'll let this run for a while like this. I brought the line voltage up to 75, which raised the B plus almost to 300 volts, just under. The current is still dropping. It's about just a little over an amp current draw. And at this voltage, this electrolytic is warming up a little bit. That electrolytic may be a problem. I'm almost certain I might have to pop another electrolytic in there to do anything further on this. But I'll see. I'll see what happens. I'll leave it cook a little bit at this voltage. I'm watching it quite closely. Nothing's popped or blown up yet. I hear a crackle coming out of the speaker every now and then. And it looks like the voltage is climbing just a little bit. We're at 300 volts now, and current is still dropping. So that electrolytic is a problem. I'll have to see what I'll need to do. I may end up having to pop another electrolytic in there. So I've let it cook for a while at 300 volts B plus. This can is getting warm. It's not hot, but it is still getting warm. So, but my current draw has dropped down to 1 amp. So I think I'm going to let it cool down at this point, and then a little bit when it's cold, I'll bring it back up to power and see what we get. I now have the line voltage up to 80 volts, and that gives me 324 volts B plus. Somehow I must have read the schematic wrong, because I thought it was only supposed to be 300. Maybe I didn't have my glasses on. Maybe that's actually supposed to be more like 400 or 500 volts. Anyways, it's 324 volts B plus, an 80 volts line, and you can hear that we're getting crackle out of the speaker. And I can see the tube filaments on the chassis are getting a little bit brighter. I'll see how warm that capacitor gets. Okay, at 80 volts line, and I've had it on for a while, several minutes, and this cap is just barely warm. It is warming up, but it's barely warm. It's not as warm as it got when I first started at a much lower voltage, first started powering this up. And our current is a little over an amp current it's drawing. So I think the next test is I'm going to bring it up to 90 volts. I'm going to let it cool down again, bring it up to 90 volts, and then I think for that test I'm going to put a signal on the antenna just to see if I get anything through. The speaker's crackling now and then, and the audio's live, the audio's working. If I move this RCA plug, so the audio is working at 80 volts. So I think when I get it up to 90, and I'm going to clean up that RCA plug a little bit too, but when I get it up to 90 volts, I think I'm going to put a signal on the antenna for that. Okay, this time I'm going to bring it up to 90 volts. I've got a signal going into it, and I believe I have it set on channel 3. I cleaned up this audio connection. I don't know if that's going to make a difference. The electrolytic can here cooled down sufficiently So let's just take a chance and see what we get at 90 volts. There we're at 90 volts, 377. I've got to look at the schematic and double check that B plus voltage. I'm not hearing anything coming out of the speaker now. Maybe I jazzed it up somehow. Well, I don't know. I thought I had more action coming out of the speaker beforehand. Now we're at this voltage. We're drawing almost an amp and a third current. Not too warm. I am seeing filaments, but you know, I got the voltage pretty low yet. I just wonder if my audio cable is not good. Maybe I soldered it, the tip of it. Maybe I wrecked it somehow or shorted it. I'll have to check it, see if well, it's only 90 volts. I'm not hearing any audio from the signal generator, but that's not surprising. You know, the IF might not be getting through the IFs. Although I didn't check the two tubes on the tuner, which I should have. I checked all the other tubes. And remember, I do have the cap off the horizontal output tube. Well, we're not too warm on that capacitor. Why don't I kick it up a little bit? We'll bring it up to 95. Well, so far I'm not hearing anything coming out of the speaker. To check my audio connection, I touched up the solder connection on the tip on that RCA plug. Maybe I screwed it up somehow, I don't know. But I thought I heard hiss out of it before, but maybe not. I'm at 110 volts in. That's ample line voltage. We're drawing an amp and 3/4. B plus is 438. And I am getting RF through. It's actually, I'm passing RF. So I am getting that. You can hear it in the speaker, not very loud, but it's there. have the volume turned up all the way. Yeah, so, and the electrolytic is warming up. So I'm thinking at this point I'm going to call this a part 2 video, because I think I'm going to have to put 247 microfarad caps in there. B plus says it's 438 volts on the capacitor, so I probably should get 500 volt caps. I'll have to see what's available and see what's supposed to be in there. But at any event, some of it is working. That's the tuner. I wiggled the tuner tubes, and tuner needs cleaning. I have to check those tubes. So some of this thing is working. Of course, I have no idea what the sweep circuits are doing. I've got the horizontal cap off. Okay, for this test, I put vacuum tube rectifiers back in. I pulled out my solid state ones, and I'm going to see, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to put capacitors in replacing those caps. So I'm going to start powering it now. And I'm going to bring it up to about 90 volts. As soon as this thing warms up, there we go. See, the 5U4 is conducting now. Current is staying low. It's drifting up a little bit. To get to 100 volts. We're at less than an amp and a half. 358 volts. See, these things, the problem with these is they're efficient, and the voltage, the B plus voltage actually is higher. There's a drop with the vacuum tube rectifiers. Okay, let's take it to 110. I just got to feel that capacitor. It's not hot, but it does warm up, so I know I'm going to have to replace it. 398 volts. Now let's go to 117. I'm not hearing my signal coming through. It's funny, I had it before. $418. Capacitor is not heating up very much now, although I don't trust it. I was passing audio through it in my last video. I don't know what happened to it now. Tuner's a little dirty. I gotta check these tubes here. They may be no good. Capacitor is still cool. But it's funny, I did have audio. The tuner's very dirty. Let me see what I can do. So finally, here's where I'm at. No vertical deflection, which is understandable. I have high voltage now. I put both rectifiers in. I had to replace the 1B3. The one that was in there was shot. So I have high voltage. And there's enough emissions on the tube that, yes, I'm going to go ahead and recap this thing. So that's good news. Bob Anderson was right. He thought that it would have a picture. I don't know how it'll be when I got full deflection, but I think that's good enough to where it's worthwhile for me to continue on with this set. So this will be the end of part 2, and I'll let it go at that. This capacitor, by the way, is staying cool, but I really should put new electrolytics in. I mean, I'm only doing this to see if I get any action out of the picture tube, which I am. So I'm pretty happy about that. So I'll go ahead with this project. There will be a part 3 coming up when I get some progress.